Imagine standing in a crowded city square 200 years ago and watching a massive wooden ship arrive from a distant continent. To the onlookers of that era, the vessel represented the wonders of global trade. They saw the arrival of exotic spices that would flavor their meals, heavy crates of silk that would clothe the wealthy, and news from lands they would never visit. However, among these treasures, there was an invisible and terrifying passenger hiding in the dark corners of the hold. In those days, a single arrival could spark a wildfire of disease that would tear through a community in a matter of weeks. The speed of the spread was breathtaking and horrifying, leaving families devastated and entire neighborhoods silenced by grief. We previously explored how a simple observation about dairymaids and their immunity through cowpox gave us the first real shield against these ancient killers. We saw how that discovery led to the eventual eradication of smallpox and showed us that we could train the immune system to fight back. But that leap from a lucky observation to a world-saving technology was not a straight line. It was a chaotic and high-stakes fight to turn a messy biological process into a standardized tool that everyone could trust. This is the story of how we learned to turn a medical miracle into a reliable global system.
In the early 19th century, the biggest problem with the new science of protection was not just the germs themselves, but the fundamental issue of trust. If you were a parent in the year 1800, you were being asked to do something that felt completely backwards and counterintuitive to every survival instinct you possessed. You were being asked to take a perfectly healthy child and introduce a foreign substance into their body for the purpose of preventing a disease they did not yet have. This was a radical departure from traditional medicine, which usually focused on treating people who were already visibly suffering. To make matters worse, you had no idea who made that substance or how clean it was. There were no labels to read, no expiration dates to check, and no government inspectors to ensure the quality of the product. The medical landscape was fragmented and opaque. One doctor might have a reliable batch of material that he had carefully maintained, while another practitioner down the street might be using a sample that had lost its potency due to poor storage or was contaminated with something much worse than the disease it was meant to prevent. It was like buying a complicated piece of machinery before anyone had invented the assembly line or safety regulations. You just had to hope for the best and place your faith in the individual person standing before you.
This lack of consistency was the first major bottleneck in the history of human health. Even though the breakthrough of immunization had happened, the world was stuck in what could be described as a wild west of medicine. There were countless competing methods and very little agreement on which one was the safest or most effective. Some practitioners still preferred the old, dangerous ways of using the actual disease to trigger immunity, a process that often caused the very outbreaks they were trying to stop. Others were using the new, milder version, but doing it in unsanitary conditions that introduced secondary infections. The result was a public that was often as afraid of the cure as they were of the disease. For the technology to truly scale and protect the human race, it had to move out of the realm of folk wisdom and individual luck. It had to enter the realm of rigorous standards. The shift required a total reimagining of what medicine was and how it should be delivered to the masses.
The turning point came when people began to realize that health was not just an individual concern or a private matter between a patient and a doctor. It was increasingly viewed as a matter of national security and economic stability. As the world moved toward a more industrial society, the health of the population became a vital resource. A sick workforce cannot man the heavy machinery of the factories or harvest the fields to feed the growing cities. This realization forced a massive shift in how governments and scientists work together. They began to realize that for a medical protection to cover a whole population, it could not just be one person's secret recipe or a lucky batch of fluid. It had to be a system.
This required a level of precision that human history had never seen before. When you build a bridge, you can measure the strength of the stones and the tension of the cables. When you forge an engine, you can check the fit of the gears with physical tools. But when you are dealing with microscopic life and biological reactions, how do you measure success before the patient actually gets sick? This challenge forced the scientific world to invent entirely new ways of seeing and testing. Researchers had to create a shared language, so a doctor in London and a doctor in Tokyo knew they were talking about the same thing when they discussed potency and purity. This was the birth of the medical standard. It meant moving away from the individual brilliance of a single inventor and moving toward a collective infrastructure of safety. They had to figure out how to keep these delicate biological materials alive and effective as they traveled across vast oceans and across borders. They had to develop containers that would not break and protocols that ensured every single dose was just as strong as the last one. It was a transition from the artisanal to the industrial, where the goal was perfect replication every single time. The struggle for standards was also a struggle against the limits of the physical world. Before we had modern cooling systems and electrical refrigeration, keeping these materials stable was a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to transport a tiny vial of life-saving fluid across a scorching desert or a humid tropical sea, when it loses its power the moment it gets too warm. This led to incredible feats of human endurance and organization. There were chains of people traveling across the globe to keep a sample fresh by passing it from person to person in a continuous link. It was a slow, expensive, and fragile way to save lives, but it proved that humanity was willing to go to extreme lengths to protect the collective. These early efforts showed that the technology of medicine was only as good as the logistics behind it. A miracle cure is useless if it cannot survive the journey to the people who need it. As the systems grew more sophisticated, the economics of the world began to change as well. We often think of the Industrial Revolution as a story of coal, iron, and steam engines, but it was just as much a story of biology and public health. By turning these medical protections into a reliable, mass-produced standard, we unlocked the ability for people to live in dense urban centers. Without these protections, the massive cities that powered the industrial age would have been constant death traps, consumed by recurring plagues that would have wiped out the gains of progress. The ability to concentrate thousands of workers in one place without constant fear of a devastating epidemic allowed for the growth of the modern world as we know it. This was the hidden engine of progress. It allowed the population to boom and the workforce to stay healthy, which in turn fueled the expansion of global trade and the rise of modern infrastructure. However, this transition from a small-scale medical curiosity to a massive industrial system was not without its victims and its internal conflicts. There were huge, heated debates about liberty and the role of the state in the lives of the citizens. As governments began to mandate these standards and require participation in health programs, many people felt their personal freedom was being threatened by a distant authority. They did not trust the new central organizations and preferred the local traditions and healers they had known for generations. This friction created a deep social divide that we still see echoes of in our modern world. It was a clash between the old world of individual choice and the new world of collective safety and shared responsibility. The winners in this era were those who could navigate this new landscape of regulation and proof, while those who clung to the unverified and unstandardized methods of the past were slowly pushed to the margins of society. By the time we reached the middle of the 20th century, the systems of standardization had become so powerful and so well integrated that we could coordinate the entire planet for a single medical goal. We created global organizations to track diseases in real time and ensure that the tools we used to fight them were the same everywhere, regardless of the country or the local economy. This was the ultimate victory of the standards fight. It was no longer about one brilliant scientist working alone in a lab. It was about a global network of factories, inspectors, and doctors, all working from the same playbook. This is what allowed us to finally corner and eliminate diseases that had haunted human civilization for thousands of years. We replaced fear and uncertainty with a rigorous, invisible system of quality control.
Why does this story matter so much today? It matters because we are currently living in the next chapter of that same ongoing fight. The platforms we use now, which allow us to design and deploy new protections in months instead of decades, are built directly on the foundation of those early standards. We still rely on that same basic idea, that for a medical technology to work, it must be consistent, it must be verified, and it must be trusted by the public. Our modern biotech world is not just a collection of clever chemicals and high-tech equipment. It is a massive, invisible web of rules, protocols, and international agreements that keep us safe in a crowded, fast-moving world. We have moved from the era of lucky guesses and observations to the era of precise biological engineering, where we can manufacture safety at an unimaginable scale.
The journey of the vaccine shows us that technical advancement is never just about the initial invention itself. It is about the complex systems we build around that invention to make it useful and accessible for everyone. It is about the boring but essential work of setting rules, checking quality, and building long-term trust with the population. As we look back at the 19th century, we see the roots of our modern regulated world. We see the moment when humanity decided that the only way to move forward was to work together toward a common standard of safety. This mindset did not just stay in the world of medicine. It began to bleed into every other part of our lives, from the food we eat to the products we use every day, creating a world where we can take safety for granted. As we move into the middle of the 19th century, this obsession with precision and laboratory control started to produce unexpected results in other fields. The same scientists who were learning how to control microscopic life were also starting to look at the very building blocks of matter. They were about to discover that by manipulating chemicals with the same rigor they used for medicine, they could create colors and materials that had never existed in nature. The era of biological standards was about to collide with the birth of the modern chemical industry.
And that is how the fight for standards in medicine turned a lucky discovery into a global shield that redefined human survival. In the next episode, we will move forward to 1856 and explore how a different kind of laboratory accident sparked the birth of synthetic dyes and industrial chemistry. This next breakthrough would change the stakes again by showing us how to rewrite the colors of the world and launch the modern chemical age. If you want to see how these threads of science and industry continue to weave together, stay tuned for the next step in our journey.